So anyway, oh, hey everybody, welcome back to Carrie's Corner, just chatting with my frog here. Today we are continuing our read of this long and wonderful book that's so well written and illustrated, The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, illustrated by Eric Kincaid, and we're beginning in the middle of a chapter when they're at Badger's house. The floor was well-worn red brick, and the wide hearth burnt a fire of logs between two attractive chimney corners tucked away in the wall, well out of any draft. A couple of high-backed seats facing each other on either side of the fire gave further sitting accommodation. In the middle of the room stood a long table of plain boards placed on trestles with benches down each side. At one end of it, where an armchair stood pushed back, were spread the remains of the Badger's plain but ample supper. Rows of spotless plates winked from the shelves of the dresser at the far end of the room, and from the rafters overhead hung hams, bundles of dried herbs, nets of onions, and baskets of eggs. The kindly Badger sat them down on seats to toast themselves at the fire and made them remove their wet coats and boots. Then he fetched them dressing gowns and slippers and bathed the mole's shin with warm water and mended the cut with sticking plaster till the whole thing was just as good as new, if not better. In the embracing light and warmth, warm and dry at last, with weary legs propped up in front of them and the cheering clink of plates being arranged on the table behind, it seemed to the storm-driven animals that the cold and trackless wild wood just left outside was miles and miles away, and all that they had suffered in it a half-forgotten dream. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, the Badger summoned them to the table where he had been busy laying a meal. They had felt pretty hungry before, but when they actually saw at last the supper that was spread for them, it seemed only a question of what they should attack first, where all was so attractive, and whether the other things would obligingly wait for them till they had time to give them attention. Conversation was impossible for a long time, and when it was slowly resumed, it was that sort of conversation that comes from talking with your mouth full. The Badger did not mind that sort of thing at all, nor did he take any notice of elbows on the table or everybody speaking at once. He sat in his armchair at the head of the table and nodded now and then as the animals told their story. And he did not seem surprised or shocked or anything, and he never said, "I told you so," or "just what I always said," or remarked that they ought to have done so and so, or ought not to have done something else. The mole began to feel very friendly towards him. When supper was really finished at last, and after they had chatted for a long time about things in general, the Badger said heartily, "Now then, tell us the news from your part of the world. How's old Toad going on?" "Oh, from bad to worse," said the Rat, while the Mole, basking in the firelight, his heels higher than his head, tried to look properly mournful. "Another smash-up only last week, and a bad one. You see, he will insist on driving himself, and he's hopelessly incapable. If he'd only employ a decent, steady, well-trained animal, pay him good wages, and leave everything to him, he'd get on all right. But no, he thinks he's a heaven-born driver, and nobody can teach him anything, and all the rest follows." "How many has he had?" asked the Badger gloomily. "Smashes or machines?" asked the Rat. "Oh, well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad." Here's the pictures. There's Badger in the top corner there, right there, and all the things they're doing in his beautiful home. Well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad. This is the 7th. As for the others, you know that coach house of his. Well, it's piled up to the roof with bits of motor cars, none of them bigger than your hat. That accounts for the other 6, so far as they can be accounted for. "He's been in hospital 3 times, put in the Mole, and as for the fines he's had to pay, it's simply awful to think of." "Yes, and that's part of the trouble," continued the Rat. "Toad's rich, we all know, but he's not a millionaire, and he's a hopelessly bad driver, and quite regardless of law and order, killed or ruined, it's got to be one of the 2 things sooner or later. Badger, we're his friends, oughtn't we to do something?" The Badger went through a bit of hard thinking. "Now, look here," he said at last rather severely. "Of course you know I can't do anything now." His two friends agreed, quite understanding his point. No animal is ever expected to do anything strenuous or heroic or even moderately active during the off-season of winter. All are sleepy. Some actually sleep. All are weather-bound, more or less, and all are resting from hard days and nights, during which every muscle in them has been severely tested and every energy kept at full stretch. "Very well, then," continued the Badger, "but when once the year has really turned and the nights are shorter, and halfway through them one rouses and feels fidgety and wanting to be up and doing by sunrise, if not before, you know." Both animals nodded gravely. They knew. "Well, then," went on the Badger, "we, that is, you and me and our friend the Mole here, we'll take Toad in hand. We'll stand no nonsense whatever. We'll bring him back to reason by force if need be. We'll make him be a sensible Toad. We'll—" "You're asleep, Rat." "Not me," said the Rat, waking up with a jump. "He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since supper," said the Mole, laughing. He himself was feeling quite wakeful and even lively, though he didn't know why. The reason was, of course, that he, being naturally an underground animal by birth and breeding, Badger's house exactly suited him and made him feel at home. But not the Rat, who slept every night in a bedroom, the windows of which opened on a breezy river. "Well, it's time we're all in bed," said the Badger, getting up and fetching flat candlesticks. "Come along, you two, and I'll show you your quarters. Take your time tomorrow morning, breakfast at any hour you please." He led the two animals to a long room that seemed half bedroom and half loft. The Badger's winter stores, which indeed were visible everywhere, took up half the room. Piles of apples, turnips, and potatoes, baskets full of nuts, and jars of honey. But the 2 little white beds on the remainder of the floor looked soft and inviting, and the linen on them, though coarse, was clean and smelled beautifully of lavender. And the Mole and the Water Rat, shaking off their clothes in some 30 seconds, tumbled in between the sheets in great joy and contentment. Following the kindly Badger's advice, the 2 tired animals came down to breakfast very late next morning and found a bright fire burning in the kitchen and 2 young hedgehogs sitting on a bench at the table eating oatmeal porridge out of wooden bowls. The hedgehogs dropped their spoons, rose to their feet, and ducked their heads respectfully as the 2 entered. "There, sit down," said the Rat pleasantly, "and go on with your porridge. Where have you youngsters come from? Lost your way in the snow, I suppose?" "Yes, please, sir," said the elder of the 2 hedgehogs respectfully. "Me and my little Billy here, we was trying to find our way to school. Mother would have us go, and of course we lost ourselves, sir, and Billy got frightened and took and cried, and being young and faint-hearted, and at last we came to Mr. Badger's back door and made so bold as to knock, sir, for Mr. Badger, he's a kind-hearted gentleman, as everyone knows." "I understand," said the Rat, cutting himself some rashers from a side of bacon, while the Mole dropped some eggs into a saucepan. "And what's the weather like outside? You needn't stir me quite so much," he added. "Oh, terrible bad, sir, terrible deep the snow is," said the Hedgehog. "No getting out for the likes of you gentlemen today." Here they are. You can see the hedgehogs and all those animals. "Where's Mr. Badger?" asked the Mole as he warmed the coffee pot before the fire. The master's gone into his study, sir," replied the Hedgehog, "and he said he was going to be particular busy this morning, and on no account was he to be disturbed." This explanation, of course, was thoroughly understood by everyone present. The animals well knew that Badger, having eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study and settled himself in an armchair with his legs up another and a red cotton handkerchief over his face, and was being busy in the usual way at this time of the year, possibly asleep. The front doorbell clanged loudly, and the Rat, who was very greasy with buttered toast, sent Billy, the smaller hedgehog, to see who it might be. There was a sound of much stamping in the hall, and presently Billy returned in front of the Otter, who threw himself on the Rat with a hug and a shout of affectionate greeting. "Get off!" spluttered the Rat, with his mouth full. "Thought I should find you all here all right," said the Otter cheerfully. "They were all in a great state of alarm over Riverbank when I arrived this morning. Rat never been home all night, nor Mole either. Something dreadful must have happened, they said, and the snow had covered up all your tracks, of course, but I knew that when people were in any fix, they mostly went to Badger, or else Badger got to know of it somehow, so I came straight off here, through the wildwood and the snow. My, it was fine coming through the snow as the red sun was rising and showing against the black tree trunks. As you went along in the stillness, every now and then masses of snow slid off the branches suddenly with a flop, making you jump and run for cover. Snow castles and snow caverns had sprung up out of nowhere in the night, and snow bridges, terraces, ramparts. That's my dog sort of getting into this. I think the dog is feeling it like she's in the wildwood. Rosie, we're not in the wildwood now. Rosie, stop howling. She's howling at the garbage trucks. Thank you, Rosie. That's enough. I'm going to keep reading. Hopefully you can hear me over the barks. I could have stayed and played with them for hours. Here and there, great branches have been torn away by the sheer weight of the snow, and robins perched and hopped on them in their perky, conceited way, just as if... Let's look. There is the otter coming through the wildwood. There they all are. Just as if they had done it themselves. A ragged string of wild geese passed overhead, high on the grey sky, and a few rooks whirled over the trees, inspected and flapped off homewards with a disgusted expression, but I met no sensible thing, being to ask the news of. About halfway across, I came on a rabbit sitting on a stump, cleaning his silly face with his paws. He was a pretty scared animal when I crept up behind him and placed a heavy forepaw on his shoulder. I had to cuff his head once or twice to get any sense out of it at all. At last, I managed to find out from him that Mole had been seen in the wildwood last night by one of them. It was the talk of the burrows. He said how Mole, Mr. Rat's particular friend, was in a bad fix, how he had lost his way, and they were up and out hunting and were driving him round and round. Then why didn't any of you do something, I asked. You may not be blessed with brains, but there are hundreds and hundreds of you, big, stout fellows, as fat as butter, and your burrows running in all directions, and you could have taken him in and made him safe and comfortable, or tried to, at all events. What, us? He merely said, do something, us rabbits? So I cuffed him again and left him. There was nothing else to be done. At any rate, I had learned something, and if I had had the luck to meet any of them, I'd have learned something more, or they would.
Weren't you at all, nervous?
Asked the Mole, some of yesterday's terror coming back to him at the mention of the wild wood. Nervous? The otter showed a gleaming set of strong white teeth as he laughed. Ha ha ha! I'd give them nerves if any of them tried anything on me. Here, Mole, fry me some slices of ham, like the good little fellow you are. I'm terrible hungry, and I've got any amount to say to Ratty here. Haven't seen him for an age. So the good-natured Mole, having cut some slices of ham, set the hedgehogs to fry it and returned to his own breakfast, while the otter and the rat, their heads together, eagerly talked river talk, which is endless, running on like the babbling river itself. A plate of fried ham had just been cleared and sent back for more, when the badger entered, yawning and rubbing his eyes, and greeted them all in his quiet, simple way, kindly asking after each one.
It must be getting on for lunchtime,
he remarked to the otter.
Better stop and have it with us. You must be hungry this cold morning.
Rather, replied the otter, winking at the Mole. The sight of these greedy young hedgehogs stuffing themselves with fried ham makes me feel positively famished. The hedgehogs, who were just beginning to feel hungry again after their porridge, and after working so hard at their frying, looked timidly up at Mr. Badger, but were too shy to say anything.
Here, you two youngsters, be off home to your mother, said the Badger kindly. I'll send someone with you to show you the way. You won't want any dinner today, I'll be bound.
He gave them 6 pence each, and a pat on the head, and they went off with much respect, swinging of caps and bowing of heads. Presently they all sat down to lunch together. The Mole found himself placed next to Mr. Badger, and as the other two were still deep in river gossip, from which nothing could divert them, he took the opportunity to tell Badger how comfortable and homelike it all felt to him.
Once well underground, he said, you know exactly where you are. Nothing can happen to you, and nothing can get at you. You're entirely your own master, and you don't have to consult anybody or mind what they say. Things go on all the same overhead, and you let 'em, and don't bother about 'em. When you want to, up you go, and there the things are waiting for you.
The Badger simply beamed on him. That's exactly what I say, he replied. There's no security or peace,
except underground. And then if your ideas get larger, you want to expand, why, a dig and a scrape, and there you are. If you feel your house is a bit too big, you just stop up a hole or two, and there you are again. No builders, no tradesmen, no remarks passed on you by fellows looking over your wall, and above all else, no weather. Look at Rat now, a couple of feet of floodwater, and he's got to move into... About to change the page, but here are those pictures. He's got to move into hired lodgings, uncomfortable, in a bad position, horribly expensive. Take Toad, I say nothing against Toad Hall, quite the best house in all these parts as a house. But supposing a fire breaks out, where's Toad? Supposing tiles are blown off and walls sink or crack or windows get broken, where's Toad? Supposing the rooms are draughty, I hate a draught myself, where's Toad? No. Up and out of doors is good enough to roam about and get one's living in, but underground to come back to at last, that's my idea of home. The Mole agreed heartily, and the Badger got very friendly with him. When lunch is over, he said, I'll take you all round this little place of mine. I can see you'll appreciate it. You understand what a home ought to be, you do. So after lunch, when the other two had settled themselves into the chimney corner and had started a heated argument on the subject of eels, the Badger lighted a lantern and told the Mole to follow him. Crossing the hall, they passed down one of the principal tunnels, and the wavering light of the lantern gave glimpses on either side of rooms, both large and small, some mere cupboards, others nearly as broad and imposing as Toad's dining hall. A narrow passage at right angles led them into another corridor, and here the same thing was repeated. The Mole was staggered at the size and extent of it all, at the length of the dim passages, the solid ceilings of the crammed store chambers, the stonework everywhere, the pillars, the arches, the pavements. How on earth, Badger, he said at last, did you ever find time and strength to do all this? It's astonishing. And that brings us to the end of today's reading. We're going to continue as Badger gives a tour of his incredible house underground. So stay tuned for tomorrow, where we continue with The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, illustrated by Eric Kincaid. Have a good day. See you later. Happy reading. Bye.